more than I know we can reasonably cover than I want us to get to talk about. And are there any Blue Sky announcements, Amanda or Molly, that you want to make before I plunge in?
Yes, I would like to say that we have a new program we're offering as a benefit of membership. We're doing our inaugural members only online exhibition, and the call for entry is open now. And the information's on our website under submissions. And if you are not a current member, you can join easily online. If you're not sure if your membership is up to date, you can shoot me an email. And yeah, I'm excited. We'll be opening in July.
Yeah, I'm taking that as imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, that we ask people to share photos for these sessions, and now Blue Sky's asking them to share in a deeper way, which is also a way to remind people that if you did share photos for these sessions, you'll need to, if you want to submit the same ones for the show that Amanda is talking about, you should follow the directions and resubmit them in that manner as well. Mm-hmm. So thank you all for choosing to spend some more time with us on, and the days are getting increasingly lovely out, and the world is sort of increasingly fascinating to look at. So I appreciate your time. And I want to thank everybody at Blue Sky who works behind the scenes to make these sessions possible, and also everybody who uploaded images. I wish we had time even to talk about one image from each of the photographers who shared their work, and we don't. But I have really enjoyed looking at them and appreciate how difficult you have made it for me to try and winnow down to just the ones we'll get to talk about today. And I'm not even sure that we will get that to the ones that I've pulled. And just to remind folks, there are, these are conversations, so I'm gonna put out some questions and some images for us to talk about, and there are two ways to share. One is, if you go down, for me it's at the bottom of the Zoom window, and I click on participants, it will give me a place where I can raise my hand, and then the fabulous Amanda will see that your hand is raised and bring you into the conversation. You can also use the chat feature, either one, although it sometimes can get hard for me to track what's going on in the chat as the conversation goes. So I tend to prefer that you raise your hand, but you should do whichever is comfortable as you want to contribute. Am I forgetting any other business? Oh, and we are recording all of these. So Amanda's just put the directions in the chat for how to raise your hand. We're recording all of these. So if you don't want to be recorded, don't raise your hand. And maybe I'll get right to it. So I'm going to share my screen. Oh. So way back in April, which seems like 3 lifetimes ago at this point, Molly said to me, Lois, would you like to create some online programs for us? And I said yes. And we decided that the focus would be on exploring how we can redefine and strengthen community by engaging online with photographs. In our first session on May 20th, we explored how our experiences of the pandemic might be shaping the way that we respond to some of the photographs in Blue Sky's archive. So shows that for those of us who get to go to the gallery in person, we may have seen, but now we look at differently. On June 3rd, things felt like they were changing really rapidly. And so in response to the murder of George Floyd and this worldwide call for racial justice, we put a pause on what we had been planning to do and instead explored how photography and videography has been used either to enforce or to challenge white supremacy. So not just documenting, but really either pushing or pushing back against white supremacy as the social order in the United States. And both of those sessions you can watch and you can share with other folks through the Blue Sky website and YouTube channel. And here we are, it's June 17th, so we're going to take a look at how the photographs that you folks have taken between May 20th And today, some people uploaded their photos very late, but they were so good I couldn't help but want to include them. But how those photographs document and deepen our understanding of this new reality, which does seem to be changing all around us all the time. But I'm going to start us off with a photo that's not one of the ones that was submitted for this session, but this photograph. And I want us to think about 3 ways that we can talk about a photograph. One is a really close reading of what are the things that you see in the photograph itself, some of the things that you notice just in the image. So that's the first way. The second way is how we might contextualize a photograph. What do we know about who took it, where it was taken, when it was taken, why it was taken, and how does that shape our reading? And then the third way is really to think about what kind of subjective or personal response we might have to a particular photograph. So I'm gonna lay this out and start on that first level. I know many of you will recognize this photograph, but don't go to the context yet. Just in terms of the formal aspects of it or how you read the photograph, what are some of the things that you notice about or that strike you or that you wonder about in terms of this photograph? And here's a perfect time to use either the chat or the raise hand feature to share your thoughts. And when you raise your hand, the fabulous Amanda will unmute you so you can share whatever's on your mind.
And I just, I put instructions in the group chat too, if you have.
And Doris has used the chat to notice or to note that there's this framing of individuals as if each is in their own world, right? Yeah, so these people are in one space, but as we look at them, they're divided up with the exception of that middle frame, which has multiple people in it. Other things that strike you or that you notice about it? Amanda, make them raise their hands so you can call on them.
I'm looking. Molly, did you have a comment? I'm gonna ask to unmute Molly. Can I see you raise your hand, Molly?
Amanda, I see your mouth moving, but do not hear any noise.
I'm unmuted.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Well, now it's all going to. A little bit-ish.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. If anybody wants to chime in, we'd love to hear from you.
So some of the comments in the chat are about sort of the strip on top, which looks like a film strip, Chris noted, versus what's beneath them. So that there are these 3 rows, they're not even, and they seem to be suggesting different things to us. Molly was commenting on folks who are looking outside the windows, some of them are looking at us as viewers and engaging with us, and we might think about how we relate differently to different people based on where their gaze is and how we're responding emotionally to them. Jude noted that, you know, there's a real divide here between who's at the front and who's at the back. And Nigel sort of added on to that and said, yeah, you know, this seems to be a racially divided space, right? That white folks are at the front, Black folks are at the back. And this is sort of extra denoted by these vertical lines that, at least in this image, seem also very white, so that they stand out against the rest of the photo, and put people in their boxes, that everybody is, as Doris said, very compartmentalized. Amanda, is anybody waiting with hands up? I can't see from where I am in the program.
No, nobody has their hand raised so far.
Okay, so maybe we should then expand this reading to that second set that I said, which is, what do we know about the context of this photo? Who took it, where it was taken, when it was taken, why it was taken? And again, I'm assuming that at least some of you will recognize it. And I think I figured out a way that I can keep my eyes on raised hands if folks are also trying to come through that way. Come on, this is an easy question, gang. Chris wants to answer. Can you unmute him, Amanda?
Hi, Chris.
Yeah, so it's Robert Frank. It's the cover of the Americans. He had a Guggenheim grants to travel around the U.S. in the 50s and photograph in a very rich and complicated way what life was like then. And a lot of it had to do with race. Robert has said that he really related to the Black people that he met and not so much to the white people he was going around the country. He would periodically get thrown in jail for being a beatnik by local police, but this is in the South. It is segregated bus seating, as was noted. Right. So it is not by accident that people have just settled into racially separated spaces. That was enforced and encoded. This is actually in New Orleans, and in New Orleans, in this streetcar, on the trolley cars, you could move that space so that you could accommodate as many white people as wanted to sit down at any given time, creating less and less space in which Black folks would have to be pressed up against each other. And yeah, that Robert Frank, you know, he's not an American, although this body of work is called The Americans, so it is very much an outsider's view of post-war America. And I think coming from Europe, right after World War II into the US and seeing what this great democracy really looked like up close was startling for Frank in many ways. And one of the reasons that I chose this particular image to start with is also because it was really resonant for me. There was a Robert Frank exhibit at Blue Sky now a few years ago, and that was the first time that I got to do a Blue Sky program. I went to Lisa, who was the executive director at the time, and said, what if I paired some poetry with some of these photographs? And it was a great program, and I've been doing them ever since. This photograph is also resonant for me in a different way, because literally the last semi-normal day of my life in 2020 involved riding on the New Orleans streetcars. I was in New Orleans doing research at an archive that's housed at Tulane, and I got on the streetcar that morning with all of my luggage for my last day at the archive, and I was going to go right to the airport, and Tulane had just announced that they were closing down the campus. And that was the beginning of the, you know, dominoes falling of things being closed. So for me, the streetcar is sort of that last pre-everything closed moment in my life. All right, so now let's take a look at
some of the photos that,
Oh,
I'm
Lois,
just gonna,
we have
yes.
Dick Wiggers wanted to chime in on this picture. You're unmuted now. Dick? Are you there?
Am I unmuted? Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yeah, and Amanda, it might be useful for you to use the chat rather than audio because it's really difficult for us to hear you.
Okay.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
What really strikes me about this photo, the eyes, the expressions, the gestures, and the woman toward the front of the bus that looks so stern and enclosed, if you will, and the openness of the black man in the back frame, and almost a relaxed gesture, and then the children in the middle, and then wondering what it is that they are looking at or who they're looking at, because they're all seem to be transfixed or at least strongly focused on something. Any idea what they were looking at or who they were looking at?
Well, presumably they might have been seeing Frank with his camera. And so responding to the idea, at the first one of these sessions, we talked about what it means to take a photograph of somebody and are you objectifying them or are you giving them their subjectivity? So we may be seeing their responses to him making a photograph of them.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yes, Chris has said they're looking at a freaky beatnik, but I think that may be more editorializing than strict historical observation. So let's take a look at the photographs that you all shared, or some of them. What do you notice? What do you think about, or questions you have about this image? And again, you can raise your hands, you can use the chat. We would love to hear voices besides mine, at least I would. Oh, Elsie, can you unmute?
I did.
Yeah. Yeah, hi. I like how there's sort of movement in the image. It's very hard to describe because there's not a lot actually going on in the background. But the way the sign is kind of, the angle of it, I really like the angling on this. Somehow it makes it feel even more empty. I'm not sure how that's working.
Yeah, I wonder whether some of that has to do with what's in focus and what's out of focus in terms of the emptiness. Like I can't, we can read the sign really clearly, but what's beyond it is a little fuzzy. And I think that that contributes to that sense of emptiness because there's nothing that we can fix on.
Yeah.
Sharon has said in the chat, I'd like to see paragraph 20, right? If you had seen this photograph 6 months ago, it wouldn't have made any sense, right? Or you would have assumed who knows what about Executive Order 20-12, paragraph 20, right? And now, even if you haven't seen that paragraph, we can all pretty much guess what it is that we have knowledge would bring to this photograph. Again, then I feel like if we saw this photograph 15 or 20 years from now, we might guess what moment it's capturing. Are there other things that strike folks about this image?
You can try clicking and raise your hand again.
Okay, let's try.
I think you're already unmuted.
Hey, Pat, you're unmuted. You ready?
This Ken.
It's actually Ken.
Yeah, hi. I'm just noticing or responding to that. What the sign says, I don't understand hardly a word in it. Now it's a big part of life. I guess that's the only thing I respond to now.
Yeah, it also, it's not a particularly friendly message. When you work with schools, you're always trying to message in ways that are inclusive, right? Pursuant to Oregon executive order doesn't sound very warm or welcoming or about the school community. And some of the other things people are noting in the chat is that it seems almost like that sign is being carried up in the wind, and that which sort of underscores the lack of any other motion in the frame, the lack of people, a playground that's, pardon me, a playground that's empty, and then the kind of implied loss of experience for the school kids who are not in this space, and as we know now, are not going to be in their school spaces for the rest of the school year. That this is antithetical to what we expect a school space to be. I might move us on to the next image if that's okay. So what do you notice, or what strikes you about this image?
Chris, what would you, I'm gonna unmute you now.
I was just going to say that as you sequence it, it goes really well as a pair with the last one of looking through the fence from both of them, and the school where there's no kids, and the home setting where the kid is.
Right. So I have used a heavy hand in ordering the photos. It's true, and that I liked the way that the element of the fence here carries over to this one, and the space where we would expect children to be playing in the playground versus the kid who's playing at what seems to be probably their home, but behind a fence that seems jarring to us. And as folks are noting in the chat, like the loneliness or the sense of alienation in a kid playing behind this fence. I also have to say, one of the things I really like about this image, I'll hold off because there's a raised hand. Can you unmute Chuck?
Yes, can you guys hear me? So I think what's interesting about this too is that the kid is involved, or could be, in like a private moment, like any kid playing in the dirt with their dog. And so like the sort of connection from the kid to the outside world, and whether or not the kid is aware of what's going on, is sort of maybe outside the consciousness of the child, right? Like the kid is just having a regular child moment, and we can look in and say it's alienating, but to me it's just, particularly in the context of the last image, is one thing, but here it just looks like, oh, this kid's having a good time.
So that's interesting, because it brings us back to that question of whose subjectivity we get. Do we get the subjectivity of the photographer or of the person being photographed? And you're suggesting, this kid is occupied by whatever is occupying him, and we're maybe doing a reading about what we think is going on with this kid, but this kid may be unaware of and uninterested in us, our reading, or anything beyond, not just beyond the fence, but beyond whatever he's playing with in his lap.
I'm wondering if Jennifer wanted to chime in. She's unmuted.
Oh, I'm unmuted?
Yeah, do you want me to mute you?
No, that's just fine. I just am on my phone, so I was trying to get logged in on my screen or my laptop. It's interesting. That's our neighbor, who I can hear playing outside right now. So it's really fun to just finally. I had some trouble getting logged in, and to see his image there. Yeah, it was an interesting moment. It's been an interesting time to watch kids, and we have a lot of time between my child and Archie's, our neighbor. We call it fence time, like FaceTime, and just what a gleeful boundary they made of it. Decorating the fence, hanging things over it, tearing it down. You can see that it's unraveled on one side. But I appreciate what Chuck said, because this also could have been any other day. in our lives, but we bring so much of that loneliness. I mean, that's what the image struck me as, lonely. But there were so many other days where I could have taken that same photo and it wouldn't have felt that same way. So yeah, I think there's a lot going on.
Yeah, and I like a lot of the composition of this photo. The fact that his head is sort of in one of the diamonds of the chain link fence, the way that the blue of the scooter and the blue of the house echo each other. And so it's both like, I mean, it's this question about the kind of photography that most of the photographs people shared were, which are, they feel like an instant capture, but the question about how we frame them and what perspectives and how just moving, in this case, maybe only a few inches in any direction would really change the photograph and the way we respond to it. Oh, and somebody has also pointed out that not only is his head framed in one diamond of the chain link fence, but his feet are too, which I think also like adds to the little kiddiness. There's something very little kitty about the way that those toes are emoting. I might move us on to the next image if that's okay. Really different photograph. To what strikes you here?
Should I jump in or wait to be called?
Jump in.
Okay. Yeah, we can all relate. I see that. I think the thing that strikes me is that most people that are tagging, I picture out alone a lot anyway, or maybe with a friend, but it seems like a socially distanced activity. And so to say it, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is someone that's never tagged before and they were inspired to do so by this moment, but something about that struck me. It's like, it seems like such a, if you choose to do that, you probably are spending some time alone anyway and apart and trying not to be seen. So something about that juxtaposition was interesting.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like my guess is that Beans is a regular figure. It's signed Beans, but it also looks like it's some sort of weird bean creature who's speaking to us. And I have a feeling, although I don't recognize this tag, that this tagger probably uses both the Beans figure and the Beans signature pretty regularly. So I don't think that's just a hunch. But this idea, right, that as somebody said, Molly said in the chat, oh, we can all relate to this feeling, right? And that's also unusual. We don't usually expect the taggers to be capturing the zeitgeist that stretches across all, class lines and many different things, that to have the tagger sort of sum up what we're all feeling. And people have been noting the sort of the composition. Oh, somebody says, yes, this is a well-known tagger. Somebody who's paying more attention on the streets than I am. Look at the composition of this piece. And I keep trying to get my head around whether the sidewalk is level and the building is crooked. Is the building crooked? And then what would happen to the sidewalk if we had the building look more vertical in the piece? But what's the effect of the tiltiness? People have been noticing it, but what does it do to you as a viewer? It looks like Chuck's got his hand up again.
It's as if the sort of the off-kilteriness of the urban environment is what's knocked Beans over.
Yeah, it seems to sort of complement what some of the folks are saying in the chat, that the world does really feel like it's tilting, it's falling apart, everything seems unbalanced to us. And somebody else said, I like the cursive writing, which is also interesting. Like when you tag, how you mark and how your words are marked is really important. And we can see that the Beans signature, now that I know that Beans is a well-known tagger, I'm going to act like I know all about that, that the Beans signature is in print, but that this cursive writing is somehow, it's like it's like we're reading Beans's journal to me, you know, the confiding to the diary about how lonely I feel. Other thoughts about Beans before we go on? All right, I'll take us to the next image. So what strikes you here?
I'll jump in and say that the ripped nature of the paper makes it look to me like a concert poster for an event that's already happened. And it makes me sort of hopeful somehow that there'll be a time when this isn't relevant. You know, that's a feeling, is like, oh, remember when that happened? Remember that event in our lives? So I like that not, it's going away.
Oh, I like that idea too. And somebody else had commented in the chat, Julie had put in the chat, yeah, why is somebody trying to peel this off? And how is that? There are different layers of art here, right? Somebody has gone to a lot of trouble to make this sticker and place this sticker, which is different than what Chris has done in taking the photograph of the sticker, which obviously, and this is a good example of, you can see the way that the composition, imagine how different this picture would look if it were just a close-up of the single Mona Lisa as opposed to including the one next to it. To me, the photograph would feel really different.
My initial reaction to the picture was, it reminded me of the time, seems so long ago now, that we couldn't make up our minds about the masks, because one is ripped off and then it's on, and then also just the universality of what's going on with the pandemic.
Yeah, and I think people are commenting about that there's something funny here, right? That in some ways it's giving us this sense of a different kind of perspective or a different way of connecting around what's happening now than having Beans describe the social isolation that we're all feeling. Yeah, and that Demi's noticing that you see a different aspect of the Mona Lisa image depending on whether you're looking at the one that's more central or the one that's slightly off to the left, that she's got gloves and a mask in both of them, but because of how these have been ripped, we'll assume that Chris did not rip them just to make a better photograph, but how they were ripped prior to the photographer encountering them, that it sort of adds a lot of texture to what's already clearly a textured piece, because there's stickers on wood, there's other marks that have been put on the wood before the pictures got there, presumably. Oh, and Chris is noting well, actually, maybe it is connecting us back to previous plague eras. I'm trying to remember when the Mona Lisa was painted, but definitely post the plague first coming to Europe. Oh, and it looks like Sharon's waiting. So Sharon, let's unmute you.
Oh, let's. Okay, so I mean, the space, the emptiness is great. I mean, just and you know, the plywood that just kind of goes through the whole thing is kind of connects everything, and whether you want to be connected or not, which is how we're all connected more than ever before. And if you don't wear a mask, you might get your head ripped off, but I don't know. But there's that space and also the beautiful gestures of the paint above, the paint, and then the two different participants of that is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And how we constantly want to rip off our mask, take it off. And it's just this constant thing. So yeah, it's a great piece.
Yeah, and again, this feels like an image that 20 years from now, you might look at and be able to know that it's of this particular moment. Other thoughts on this one before we move on? And Chris has already told us in the chat that he took this when he was in New York. So we can tell that it's the sophisticated and snide New Yorkers attitude that we're seeing in our Mona Lisa mask.
It's also.
What was the date on that?
The date on.
Oh,
like when you exactly took it.
Sharon's asking Chris maybe if he remembers what date he took this. We'll put that question out to Chris, and in the meanwhile, Chuck, was there a comment you were going to make?
Yeah, so there's sort of a high art joke here as well. So in 1919, there's a Marcel Duchamp piece where he draws a mustache and a goatee on the Mona Lisa. So which is the sort of this exact part, the mask of her, this being this kind of like the feminine kind of ideal that gets sort of played with 101 years ago in a kind of a high art way with covering the mouth and nose, and here it is again. So I don't know if people got the joke, but there it is.
Oh, well, I think we all got the obvious visual joke, and now you're giving us historical context. Molly, who's trained as an art historian, is very pleased with this Dadaist connection you've made across the centuries. Any more thoughts on this one before we move on? Ooh, what have I done? Sorry. So here's our next one, a very different image. What strikes you about this one? Jennifer's noticing the care taken in the lettering, right? That that there's a real purposefulness and a real deliberateness about how it was done. And what does it mean, as Molly is saying, to literally wear your wishes in this way? Elsie's commenting on the posture of the person in the image. He's got a walker, but he's standing upright, and he's got his hands pressed against what seems to be the framing of a window or a door. I think that sense that so many of us have had about being on the inside looking out, we commented on that in some of the earlier photos that we looked at in previous sessions, and how we all now relate to that in a different way, having spent long stretches of time at home. But what does it mean to do that wearing this sign about end of life wishes? It looks like Jude has a hand up. Can you unmute Jude?
Hi, I'm just struck by this image. There have been so many deaths in retirement homes and long-term care homes. And in some cases, apparently so many people were ill that they weren't actually able to provide adequate health care, and people died in spite of. So this is, it's a pretty strong image, I find.
Yeah. And I think Dick has a hand up, and so does Kit. So if you can give us Dick next, Amanda.
Having visited a number of people in nursing homes over the years who were near the end of life, when do I get to go home is one of the questions that's often asked. And this person seems to be expressing, don't hold me back, let me go. It's a very striking image.
Yeah, people keep commenting on his sort of physicality about the shoulders being open, the arms being raised, in this sense of decidedness, I think, that the posture conveys, as well as, which ties to what people said about the careful wording of or careful crafting of the sign. Kit, did you want to share a thought?
Yeah, the image strikes me as like sad, but also like hopeful and spiritual, because like he's wearing like the dark clothes. He's obviously an elderly person, but I notice him like looking like out and like towards the light, and it has like the spiritualness to it that like makes me feel like both sad and hopeful.
Yeah, in pre-COVID life, I was a hospice volunteer, and right now you can't do any hospice volunteering. Normally you spend time with people on hospice and their families. And there is something, there's a really interesting shift for many people when they get to the point where they have decided that curative care or highly interventional care is not something that they want anymore, and a sense of being in a different phase and being more at peace, I think, with that decision, which I think we all want to read in this image as well. As Molly put in the chat, having a voice when we are in a culture that really does a lot of death denial, and what does it mean to accept rather than deny the possibility of death. Any other thoughts on this one? And you guys noticed my chain link fence to chain link fence before. And on this one, I moved us from the really funny image of the Mona Lisa in her mask to this much more serious image of remembering that this is a real matter of life and death, and that for many people, the vulnerability of being older, the vulnerability of having other medical conditions is really intensified under this pandemic. All right, I'll take us to the next image. So what strikes you about this one? What do you notice? Chris has commented on the social distancing. Yeah. And Jennifer is noticing the covered mouths. So we've already talked a little bit about masks and what they do to faces, but the covered mouths with signs about silence, that even though you have the sense that this is a big public space, there's something that feels very quieted about the image. And Chris is noticing the fake birds in front of the fence in front of the pond. Molly, I'm going to push you. You've used the word resigned in the chat, and I'm wondering if you could say more about what gives you that impression.
Unmute myself. Yeah, it seems perhaps this is after a day of actively protesting. There just seems to be a kind of, maybe there's a break in the energy, but it seems almost either resigned or sort of like maybe expecting something, expecting the next action or voice to come out or declaration. It seems kind of sad to me. but I think it almost seems like a pause, and I'm waiting for the next step.
Yeah, for activism, it doesn't seem very active, does it? As you say that, I think that happens in a few places from the posture. So the figure on the right is looking down, which it's hard not to read as some kind of either weariness or sadness of some sort. And then the figure on the left, both the crossed arms and that posture with the one leg crossed in front of the other, with the toe to the ground, is not, that's a stance of pause, not a stance of taking action.
I almost want like a panoramic, like I want to see what else is happening in the scene.
Yeah, and we do have a little bit of a sense of that, right? That there's these other figures going on the left that suggest that there's more action somewhere else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you meant, Molly?
Yeah, that's what I meant, yeah.
Yeah, as Yu Yang has said, there seems to be this sense about disappointment or frustration towards the injustice, or as Jennifer said, that these look almost like folks who are waiting for a bus. So we don't know quite what the context is, but it doesn't feel as active as we might expect. Other thoughts on this one? And I will now confess that all of the images, aside from Robert Frank, that we've talked about so far are ones that had actually been submitted in the first 2-week period that we put that invitation out. So this was kind of early in the protests that this image was taken. And again, you should question my curatorial choices, because I've decided which pictures to share from the hundreds that were submitted and what order to put them in. But this was kind of the first set, and it was interesting for me to think about how the moment shifted in the past 2 weeks and what kind of images people have shared from more recent photographs that you've taken. So here's the next one. What strikes you about this one? And I'm apologies if you're looking on a phone. I can see everybody leaning into their Zoom to try and see it more closely. So what strikes you about this image?
I would like to chime in. It looks really rural where that is. There doesn't look like there are very many people, and still there's a message about a pandemic where you need to keep distant.
Right, so we have some sort of like plastered message on the side of what looks like a maybe rural, maybe just old-timey structure, but a lot of green. So much of this image is green. The green grass, the green plants, the green trees, but also the green of that building. People are asking, is there something written across the mouth? Is that a mask? Joseph says the message seems more powerful for the fact that it's surrounded by rural green emptiness. Joseph, you may want to share with people if you figured out what it says on that sign, because I'm not sure everybody's been able to detect it. So yeah, it says, "I can't breathe." So it is not just an image of a mask, but it is an image of this moment of responding to the murder of George Floyd. And as people are noticing that, especially as you start to focus on trying to decipher what the that poster is saying, it also brings your eye into the stop sign, which is the way the photo is composed, right on the same level as that face. And the fact that if that poster were put, again, like our previous debate about is the building off kilter, is the sidewalk off kilter, if it were placed perfectly aligned with the vertical of the building, I think that that the image wouldn't be as powerful. There's something about that being slightly off. Other thoughts about this one? It looks like Chris maybe has a hand up.
So to me, this when I was doing my Atje photography project, I noticed that Atje's pictures of statues, the statues look sentient, they look living. And I think in this picture, or the energy of it, is that that face on that's been posted there feels like there's a being inside it. It feels sentient to me.
Yeah, I agree. Can you say what gives that impression? Because I'm having exactly the same response that you are, and I'm not quite sure what is it that gives it that effect.
No, I don't know, but I know it when I see it.
I wonder if, part of it is the eyes. It's clearly not meant to really look like a face, right? There's sort of a Muppet relationship to a nose there. There's no nose, even no bump for where the mask would be covering the nose. But it may be something about the fact that the rectangle of the poster actually feels like a head in combination with the eyes, but it feels more like a person than like a sign. Oh, and as Sharon is observing, that also there's an idea of the height, that it feels like maybe this is somebody that we would be looking eye to eye with from where the photo is taken. And somebody had mentioned way back in the chat that it's interesting to think about this sign being up in what feels, as people were saying, like a more maybe rural, maybe just suburban. It's hard to tell in Portland or in the larger Oregon metro area. But I think also that this doesn't seem like a place, it's not like putting a poster up on the light post at the corner of Hawthorne and Cesar Chavez, right? That this doesn't seem necessarily like a place where a lot of people are gonna come across this image, which also tells us something about the ubiquity of this message at this moment, that it seems to be all of a sudden appearing everywhere. Which, for those of you who were on the Zoom earlier, before we started the formal program, I said, I'm a historian, and it's really, as a historian, interesting to think about this particular moment as a global movement and what is so different about it than other moments. Yeah, and again, folks are noticing that stop sign. I'm going to take us, unless there's somebody waiting, to the next image. And I will admit that now we're starting to get into the place where it was really hard for me sometimes to choose just one image when people sent in a set that really felt related. So we'll see more than one image from this set. But what strikes you about this image? Jennifer's commenting on the woman looking tired. I think of weary is the word that strikes me more than tired. And maybe I think of weary because it feels like that's also part of struggle and not just a physical exhaustion. Molly's noticing the many messages. So in white supremacy is prominent in front. There's also a defund the police ACAB sign behind her, but also we have this sort of intimation of another sign in the lower left-hand corner of the image. We can't, I don't think we can quite see what that one says. And Chuck is saying, yes, she's probably been waiting a long time to end white supremacy, as I think have we all. What else do you notice about either the central figure or the way that the other figures are positioned in relation to her? And again, feel free to use the raise hand if you'd like to speak. Yeah, Ellen is noting the textures of the fabric around her face. That we've talked about this with some of the other pictures too that we've looked at today, the tactile nature of them. The fabric of her mask, which we really notice, I think, because of the folds in the way it is on her face, but also the wrap around her neck and around her head. There's something that draws me to her as a figure because of that. And as Eugenia is noticing the variation in the fabrics and the styles. And then seeing the bandanas of the other people around her, which is a different kind of fabric and a different kind of masking. And Kit, you mentioned the hands and sort of the expression on this guy behind her. Can you tell us, maybe you could unmute and tell us a little bit more about what you mean, what you want us to notice about that?
I think I noticed like the way it looks to me like he's like clutching his hands and like clutching his bag. And I don't know, he strikes me as like nervous or grievous, or, you know what I mean? Like he's emotionally present in that moment. And I don't know, it strikes me that he's carrying like grief or concern, or that he's there, you know, in unity with her sign is how I'm seeing him.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, the fact that he's a white guy, right? He's taller than she is. He could easily be overwhelming her in this photo, but instead he seems to be aligned with her, or as you're saying, sort of, she's looking straight at us and he's not. I feel like she's a really commanding presence, and I feel like he's sort of a good support act to her commanding presence. Am I capturing what you were thinking, Kit?
Yes, and I forgot the video was off. I was nodding as you were talking.
It's all right, because I seldom am able to see who's speaking because I've got so many things going on my shared screen. Yeah, and Elsie also noted in the chat that she's really centered and framed and in focus, while other figures are either, as he is, slightly out of focus, or we don't have their full faces, or sometimes maybe both of those things are true. So that she is clearly a central figure, but represented in terms of her relationship to this crowd that she is very much a part of. And Eugenia is also noticing all of her rings, that there's this level of adornment that I think also makes her a really powerful figure. And Joseph saying, yeah, that we read hands all the time, but especially when somebody is masked, that whatever we can see of them tells us something about display and presentation. Any other thoughts on this one? Yeah, Judah's commenting on the handmade sign, right? So we talked a little bit about the do not resuscitate sign and the way that it is lettered. And this is lettered in a different way. And I'm one of those, like, you know, plan ahead and then the D doesn't fit on the sign people. So that there's something about the way that each of these words is framed on that sign that's also really compelling. Any other thoughts on this one before we move on? So the next one is from the same set, and I don't know if that means it's from the same day, but what do you think of this image, either on its own and or in terms of how it compares to the last one? And it looks like Chris has a hand up.
It's gonna.
Wait, Chris, did you unmute and then get remuted?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the other one, where the woman was standing there, she has this white guy sort of rising up out of him like steam off a rock, but basically she's alone, even though she's in a crowd, in the logic of the picture. This is the logic of the picture. This guy is not at all alone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that there's this group, but there's also sort of the relationship between human and machine that's really fascinating here. Chuck, I think you're up now.
Yeah, I'm struck by sort of two things. One is the great order that's in this image of the way that the bikes are arranged. They're like a formation. And the sense of power, and how if we're talking about the kind of protests that we've been seeing and that in reaction to the death of George Floyd and others, this is kind of an analog to all the images we've been seeing of cops with helmets and people standing in lines and having a sense of force and power.
Right, a power that comes not from the state investing you with power, but instead from banding together with other people who share a commitment to a cause. And Eugenia has noted in the chat that some of you may have seen there, Compton Cowboys and other groups of Black folks who have been attending the protests on horseback, which I find those images especially compelling, and that this is sort of an analog to that, but also thinking about, for those of you who've ever seen the Dykes on Bikes at a Pride parade, another sort of seizing of power across what we might expect based on social dictates. Other thoughts about this image? I kind of like the way that everyone is together, and you have this this sense of that they're ready to move too, right? It's clear that they're stopped at this moment, but that there's going to be not just motion, but like noise. You can hear the sound of what this procession is going to be like. Other thoughts about this one? And I have to admit that the next photographs, I'm just going to show you a whole bunch of them, and they're not all of the ones that the photographer submitted, but there are a lot of them because I wanted to get a sense of, to us to talk about a collection of photographs. We've mostly been talking about single images, doing a little bit of comparison, but what does it mean when we have kind of a body of work of photography? So I will take you through these all at once, and then we can go back and talk about them kind of as a group. But if you want me to return to particular ones, we can. Were we standing in the gallery, you could just do that by looking around, but you're trapped by the progression of my PowerPoint. So here's the set. And I'm happy to move back to any of the other ones that I've already flipped past. But let's talk a little bit about this set of photographs and how they kind of work together as a body of work. Or again, if you have comments about individual ones, or if you want me to, if there's one in particular or two or three that you want me to go back to, just let me know. All right. Chris, are you up?
Yeah, I really like actually the first one, which I feel like has that sort of, it feels like there's a, George Floyd is actually animate inside that image of himself. But I like the whole group to sort of say he's everywhere, you know, and that everybody's thinking about him. And I think the group as a whole is different from any one picture.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you've kind of caught me on exactly why I didn't want to just choose one or even two from this set, that there's something about both the ubiquity, especially when we see the name written or the posters put up in different places, but also the variety, right? So this image of George Floyd is beautiful and compelling, both just looking at the image of George Floyd himself on this sign, and then thinking about the larger context of the flags in the background, of the person holding the sign.
Yeah, and her expression, the woman who's holding the sign, is very powerful, and she looks really sad.
Yeah, and Judith's commenting in the chat that there's a way in which this seems that one of the graphic images that we in this generation have indelibly in our minds is the hope graphic from the Obama campaign. And what does it mean to have this related, equally powerful, but very different image to hold now? And somebody commented on the second one in the set. And the fact that just the way that it's framed, which I'm guessing it's shot through scaffolding in the ubiquitous New York scaffolding, but that the scaffolding feels like a cross kind of superimposed upon his name. Kit, were you winning?
Yeah, the first one, if you could click back to it, I just like, it's such a powerful image, and it's so, it's so much like seeing his face like under a structure with the American flag there, and the red, like the picture is really has like a lot of, is very powerful.
Yeah, the red of the flowers picks up the red of the flag, the way that her eyes are shaded as she's looking in one direction, his eyes are shaded as he's facing us.
Yeah, but I'm just also thinking of like him underneath the structure reminds me of him being under, you know, the racist structures in our society, and the red like reminds me of like violence and the violence that he went through, and the American flag, like, you know what I mean, like above him. Like there's a lot in that picture. It's really powerful.
And I'm trying to think, I don't know what this arch actually commemorates and how colonialist it may or may not be as a structure standing in New York. But this is a good example, as many of the pictures that we have looked at today, of what seems to be the quickly taken image that, in fact, once you stop and look at it, you can see all of the details that really make it work, that make it powerful as a photograph, that it is not just a quick snapshot that gets us there. And maybe I'll scroll through some of the other ones again if folks want to see them more. we talked before with Beans about, you know, what does it mean when the taggers are summing up the zeitgeist? And this is tagging with a really very specific political message, but also words that I think any of us who have been to protests in the past few weeks have already said these words, that these words are words in his memory. And any other thoughts on any of these individual photos or on the set? Last time we started with an image of a mural that's been painted in George Floyd's memory in Minneapolis. And I think, Amanda, you were the one who commented about like the way that street art has so quickly become part of this particular political moment and political movement. And that many of these photographs they're artistic objects as well as documentary objects in their own right, but they're also capturing this street art that is emerging all around us all the time. And Julie's commenting on the respectfulness of this particular image. Julie, could you say more about, oh, it's the Mr. George Floyd, right? Addressing him as Mr. I also find the rest in power, which is a phrase I've heard before, but hearing it here, really moving because this particular death seems to be hopefully catalyzing some deep and lasting change. And Julie, what else did you want to share?
Well, just this last image is, for one, I love how it's framed. I love the colors, and it's just so folk art. It's so beautiful. I'm trying to figure out, like, are those paintings, like, how did they do it? It looks really, really big. And yeah, the rest in power is very respectful. And then the Mr., you know, calling him Mr. George Floyd. And then he just kind of, the artist just kind of goes, and all the others. But yet that's, even though that doesn't offer the same sort of respect in any way, it's almost like it's just overwhelming to think about all the others. Here's two more faces, you know, Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, that we know, but there's so many others. Anyway, so I just think about it in that context.
Yeah, that all the others here doesn't seem dismissive. It doesn't seem like a empty gesture. It actually seems, I think in part because we get other faces, that there's also the sense of both the respect and the frustration.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
And also I'm thinking, we don't know if the person who wrote the words is the same person who did the images. That it could be like a community, like I'm struck by, you know, someone put up the board and that's not about art, but that board was up there, and then the words could have gone up, and then the images, and then the photographs. So it's like this rebirth of goodness out of, you know, bad things.
Yeah. And as you will see, again, the heavy hand of Lois as curator, that this in some ways connects us back to the image that Chris had taken in New York of the Mona Lisa in the mask, also plastered on a similar kind of plywood board. And that was maybe funny, maybe the art history joke that Chuck reminded us of, but that this is kind of bringing it to a much more serious and politicized place. we have, as usual, gone over the amount of time we were supposed to go, but I want to share a few more with you. So that was a whole set. This one, I debated whether to put in any of the images I had taken, and my honey said, oh, this is a good one because of the hand-lettered nature of the sign, right? You can imagine somebody not having, you know, Xeroxed these off or printed them or whatever, but there's just this kind of DIY command to all of us to educate yourself about the history of racism. And as Chris is noting in the chat, that the arrow, right, is implies a kind of motion that we can be set in once we understand the history. Any other thoughts on this one? I did exactly what you're not supposed to do, which is talk about my own picture. I'll say this about my, the educate yourself message Eugenia likes, and kind of the activism on polls, which we've seen in other of the images that people uploaded. But one of the things, as somebody who educates about the history of racism, is that so much of that is awful history in America, and a history meant to denigrate and dehumanize. And I always like to remind everybody that that people retain and assert their humanity in all sorts of ways, even in a white supremacist culture that's trying to dehumanize them. So I wanted us to end with a couple of other images that these, I won't mention that certain people missed the deadline for the first set of photos back when we thought we were going to be talking about these 2 weeks ago. And so I didn't see these in the first set of images, but these two are actually from 2 weeks ago, not from the most recent set that came in, but I wanted to end with these. So here's one, and here's the next one. And tell me what your thoughts are about these two images, and I'm happy to go back and forth between them about 1 million times if you would like. Oh, sorry.
Can you go back? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's what I thought I was doing.
This one is so lovely. There's so much pride and happiness in this one. It's just like, it's a counterpoint to, it's nice to see all of the protest, but the actions that led to that kind of protest this is related, but it's just this joy that I'm very moved by.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, like, you get just reading these figures, right? Like, she's got her hand on her head in the almost like, I can't believe I got here. And then she's like, you know, we can tell that this is, as Julia is saying in the chat, a drive-up graduation celebration, which is what folks are experiencing now. But like, she's dressed up for it. She's got her cap, her gown, her fantastic earring, and that these people, we don't quite know what their relationship to her is, but we know that they all adore her and that they are sharing in her joy. The fact that, except for the woman holding the sign celebrating Michaela by name, they've all got their hands up as she has her hands up. This idea of like, the physicality of happiness in this picture is really wonderful. Yeah, as Ellen's similarly commenting on, like, what does it mean to have everybody pointing upward or hands raised? And the fact that there's a tree here, right? That this would be a imagine this scene without that tree. It would be pretty dismal, but there's nature and there's light on those leaves in a way that makes, as Ellen says, her luminous face all the more luminous because we have the tree illuminated as well. And I'll advance to the other one. Yeah, Chris's observation that we've had so much of the hands up, don't shoot, that hands up in unmitigated joy is so great to see. And what about this one? A really different feel, right? In terms of where the graduate is and the other figures. I feel a little bit bad to end with her crying, but I think that those are tears of pride and joy. Sharon, did you have a thought? Sharon, I think you need to unmute so we can hear you.
It says it's the school is specialized support services for youth ages 12 to 21 who have dropped out of school and who are experiencing chronic attendance behavior issues. So it provides multiple pathways to graduation with a standard diploma and social service, and yeah, so it's a very big deal to graduate from there.
Yeah, these are the kids who our school system doesn't usually serve well.
Right.
And they found a place where they can thrive.
Right.
And I kind of love, in as much as we, oh, Elsie's waiting. I'll hold my thought. Elsie.
Oh, just a comment, not so much about the photographs, but I used to work doing convocations, and you know, that's often inside auditoriums, and there's just, it's joyful and there's families shouting, but in some ways with this pandemic, having all the graduates out on the streets and seeing the teachers yelling at them from the, you know, social distancing has actually been very, I love the fact that it's come out into the light, because the joy, the relief, the family, I think this is an interesting change. I just wanted to celebrate that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. When you say the teacher's yelling at them, you mean yelling in celebration.
Yes, like you did it, hooray, and all that stuff. You know, I've seen clips or stuff about that, yeah.
Right, and it, like, just think about the space of this one, that there seem to be family members up on the balcony, as it were, looking out so that they're capturing what we assume is the drive-by awarding of the diploma, that we don't know who this guy is, but the beaming face that he has, and it's not his graduation, but he's dressed up to celebrate her graduation. And as Ellen is commenting, and the sort of mixed emotion. I mean, I think that it's often true at graduations that there's tears of joy and sadness, but that this has been such a loaded time. One high school senior I know said, if one more person says to me how sorry they are that I have missed all of the normal parts of senior year, I don't know what I'm going to do. That sense of what's missing and what the future holds is I think especially intense for this year's graduating classes. Any more thoughts on our pictures? Maybe I will unshare my screen so we can go back to just being humans in a conversation. Well, so when Molly asked me in April, will you do some programs? And I thought, well, what can we do that isn't just second best for people being able to meet in the gallery, but that will create something different that we wouldn't otherwise be doing? I sort of knew what I hoped would happen, and this is part of what I hoped would happen, but this has been more than I could have expected, both in terms of national and global events, but also in terms of the kind of images that you all have shared and the conversations that we've had. So I want to thank you all, and I think that there will be more. We haven't quite decided what's next yet, but we have definitely want to keep having these conversations. So shall we unmute and have a free-for-all conversation?
It's not giving me the option to unmute everyone this time, but everyone's allowed to unmute themselves. So if you'd like to, please do.
Yeah, Lois, thank you so much. You did a great job as always. Wonderful.
Yeah.
For the extroverts, this has been a particularly difficult time. And as somebody who loves doing public programs, I really do feel like the difference between when we get to build meaning together and build community together by talking about the work versus just viewing the work is so important. And we have all had to make sense of things that none of us could have anticipated in the past few months. So it's been great for us to have this forum together.
And I will say that I've been very grateful for Zoom. I had to tell, I moved to Yakima from the Bay Area, in Santa Cruz and Oakland and Berkeley. I have met, and I am an extrovert, but in Yakima, it's not like all of Yakima is bad, but it's a very challenging community for me that I've not really made my tribe. So for me, taking part with like Sangha in different areas and you guys, it's huge for me. So it's very nice. I hope that you will think about doing occasional Zoom meetings for people like in New York and stuff, so we can join in occasionally.
You mean even once the rest of life goes?
Yeah, exactly.
In person.
I mean, I'm going to try to send stuff in for the show, and I would normally not do that, right? I mean, and so, I'm just saying for me, it's been a great thing to have Zoom. I'm seeing more people face to face than I would normally, except for teaching, you know. That's all. So thank you for being there.
Sure. And again, there are so many wonderful photographs, including ones that 2 weeks ago, or when I was getting ready for the show, for the program 2 weeks ago, I had many more images that I was going to share. And then I just felt like we really needed to have the conversation that we had 2 weeks ago and talking about the role of photography and videography around race and racism in American history. So I apologize profusely to everybody whose photographs we didn't get to look at.
Me, don't forget about mine right now.
And again, now you can repurpose them now that Blue Sky is sort of taking this idea of sharing our photographs to a different level.
In 2020.
This was really a treat, and it's very special to me that you showed those grads, because that was 3 days of running all over the city, and it was very hectic, and yet the joy and the tears, it was an honor to do that. And tonight KGW just ran a clip of stills as well as a video from that 4 days of it. I photographed 3, and then Catherine Kimball photographed one of the other days. So thank you.
So
That was great.
Where were you as this was happening? Are you like in a car following the procession? How did it go down?
I'm in a car following the procession. There was probably at least 20 cars. And sometimes we were in parking lots at apartment buildings, and sometimes rolling up in front of homes. And we were all over East County and Multnomah County. And then for the homeless kids, we were in the parking lot of the school. So it was an interesting time. But yeah, I would get out of my car. I never stayed in my car, and I always wore a mask.
No, I mean, I think again, it's I mean, my niece graduated from high school in Camas, and I couldn't be there, right? They all, I don't think they even did a drive-by. I think they sat in the basement and watched it on the TV, right?
Oh.
And it is a strange thing to not have that celebration, and seeing your choice not to just choose the graduate, but to have the graduate in the context of the people who love the graduate was really very powerful in both of those images.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing them. It was a fun night seeing everybody's work.
Yeah.
Gave me lots of ideas.
Sharon has her hand up, I think. Sharon, do you have your hand up?
Oh, yeah, I do.
I'm sorry. I jumped in there. I apologize. My teacher thing.
I think it'd be great. I mean, I know some other forums are going to continue. Going to continue a little bit with these Zoom meetings just because I mean, it's going to go on for a while, and it'd be nice to see even more quarantine images because it's just such a specific time frame. So I don't know. I mean, it would, you know, it depends on everybody, but I think it's a really nice to be able to do this.
And I'm a horribly manipulative person. I'll just tell you all that. Because I really chose, from the images that people shared, I chose the ones that felt both specific to this time, but also that people would identify with this time. So some people took pictures that clearly represent their experience, especially in the first few weeks that we had this open, their experience of the pandemic. But to you or me might have just looked like somebody's time on the lake, right? The pictures were beautiful, but they didn't necessarily convey to somebody outside the experience that it was part of this moment. And so I didn't opt to share those, but I wondered about that choice on my own behalf. And some of that is just the embarrassment of riches of having so many great images that people shared.
Well, there's just so many different viewpoints.
Yeah.
There's so many ways you can go.
And sometimes sets that that are particularly powerful to look at all together, and then you think, well, if I just pull out one, is it going to have the same effect? I mean, this is the power and the frustration of the curatorial role.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was fun. I love sitting in my backyard watching all of it. I could sit here another hour. So thank you very much for doing this.
Sure.
I like watching you in your backyard because I don't have one.
Oh, but you have beautiful blue and green background.
So I got the notice about sending in images as a member. Are we going to is it going to be a similar thing for the member show too, or not? Wait.
No, it's going to be slightly different. It's going to be, well, we're going to do a First Thursday live on YouTube event like we did with our Northwest Shores opening. So it'll be like a slideshow of the images. And then the images will live on the website. That's the online exhibition part. So it'll be a July 1st Thursday event.
And then you'll send a link out, because I don't know, just go to YouTube.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Email, social media, all of it.
Oh wow.
And when is the deadline for that, Amanda?
26.
It's not right in front of me, but I believe it's the 26th.
26, I believe,
okay.
Yeah. 26.
Thank you.
Yeah, and even once the gallery is open again, there's going to be a space of time between a few people can come into the gallery at a time and look at the images, and we can all gather there for in-person programs.
Okay, look at Julie's kitty. I love the kitty on Julie's.
Are we now at the point in the season where we have to show our pets? It's inevitable.
Yeah, it happens with every group. I love it. Yeah.
We'll get our turtle.
Yeah, they can't stay away.
I think I recognize the guy in the red tie. I don't know if you remember. Was that near Vancouver, Washington, or near, like, kind of, anyway. Was that your picture, Julie? That one with the graduation? I just remember he looks like a poet I know that works with students.
It might be. I forget his name. He's the vice principal at Helens View High School.
No, not the same.
Okay.
He's not a vice principal, but anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
Wait, that young person is the vice principal?
He looks a little
yeah.
bit,
Yeah, you're talking, yeah, where the girl was crying, where the young woman was crying. Is that what you're?
Yeah. I thought it was a poet. His hair is a little too neat, but it looks similar to my friend.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he could be a poet.
Well, he works with students also. I mean, he does something with. I've only met him a few times at festivals, but I mean, we have a connection. So
yeah.
Maybe
he seemed very soulful.
It's a beautiful picture. I love that one.
Yeah. He would run in and hand them the bottle and then literally zip out like really fast. And he usually had a mask on. He just didn't for that one. So yeah, it's just really hard photographing people in masks. So
So
Anyway.
I love that image of the orange cat in the gallery.
Thank you. I took that. That's our neighbor. He lives in the Pearl District in Portland.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Well fed.
All right, it's time for me to go make dinner. Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank you, Zemi. Thank you, Amanda, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you
Same
all.
here.
All right. Bye.
Bye.